What was the most petty thing an adult did to you when you were younger? In Cub Scouts, we were doing the Pinewood Derby. I worked really hard on my car. My dad helped, of course. I had already won the first 3 rounds, and before the final round, one of the dads of the other kids picked up my car to hand it to me. It slipped out of his hand and broke the wheels when it hit the floor. I'm convinced it was not an accident and he was sabotaging my car so his kid would win. This was over 30 years ago and I'm still salty about it. One of my packs had to make a rule that only the parent of the scout could touch their car because stuff like this was happening way too often. The Pinewood Derby and the other racing events were meant to build sportsmanship, yet some parents take it way overboard. There's a movie making fun of exactly this called Down and Derby. Yes, same with my son's Cub Scout pack. Only the parent of the scout and the one person checking to see if the cars were qualified, weight, etc. could touch the cars. If this was not followed, the offending party was immediately disqualified. When I expressed my shock at this to my husband, because all the families currently involved with scouts are awesome, he said it was due to huge problems in the past that nearly escalated into fisticuffs that these rules were put in place. So, the problem was the parents, not the kids, as usual. Sigh. I was feeling sick one day in grade 3 or 4 and the substitute teacher wouldn't let me go to the nurse's office because I didn't look sick enough. I had strep throat. What are you doing? Strep throat. I hate how much I love this comment. I was in middle school at a friend's sleepover. Her parents were very strict. She and her siblings got pulled out of public school to go to a Catholic school, were homeschooled in high school, and they scared the hell out of me. Anyway, it was probably like 11 PM at this sleepover, and her mom hesitantly let us watch the Disney movie Zenon, Girl of the 21st Century. I laughed at her part, and even though her parents were awake, they came into the living room to scold me for being too loud. Not long after, I took a drink of water, choked, and started coughing. They called my parents after 11 PM to come pick me up because I couldn't behave. They had no regard for them being asleep and having jobs to get to early in the morning. They wanted me out for laughing and coughing in the span of about 10 minutes. My parents never let me stay the night at her house again and are still mad at them for doing that almost 20 years later. Sounds like they just didn't want you there and were trying to come up with an excuse to send you home. If they were that hesitant to let them watch a really tame Disney movie, they probably saw her as an unknown, outside evil. I was at an Easter egg hunt when I was around 6. It was in a big park area with lots of rocks. I saw a little chocolate egg foil glisten and ran over to pick it up. As I reached my hand out to pick it up, a man trod on my hand to stop me getting it. Then he called his kid over to find it. Jesus, this might be the worst one on here, assaulting a child over a candy. My daughter was 11 and got slapped in the face by a woman at a Mardi Gras parade over some freaking beads. I almost got arrested after that incident. When I was like 9 or 10, I was rollerblading home from my mom's work, right? And I'm heading down 4th Street, and I find something like $16 on the ground, a 10, a 5, and single just laying there on the sidewalk next to some outdoor seating at a cafe. Being the obnoxiously nice kid that I was, I pick it up and kind of look around, wondering if anybody lost their money. That's when the lady in the weird sweater vest comes around the corner. We make eye contact and I tell her I found this money, and she goes, "Huh, let me see it." And my naive ass is like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. She's a grown up / she can sort this out." She looks around, hands me the single bag, puts her finger to her mouth in a SHHH gesture, then she just fricks off, never to be seen again. And that's why I always just pocket money like a thieving little snake. I don't know that it's a snake-like thing to pocket the money. How are you supposed to track down the owner anyway? It's not like it has their name on it and who memorizes the serial numbers on their bills. You'll just get some rando claiming it's theirs and have to take their word for it. When I was in like 5th grade, I didn't put a book cover on my math book. It required cutting up a paperback, something similar. We couldn't really afford the fancy ones, and I just never did it. So my math teacher took away my math book, so I couldn't do homework or follow along in class. Like WTF, who does that to a kid? When my mom found out, she went down to the school and raised hell about interfering with my right to an education or something. The school district was terrified of her until I graduated. We were required to cover our books too, but the teachers who were strict about it made us do it in class. Like literally the day we are handed the book, the teacher got out a big stack of paper bags and we'd spent 10 minutes all making book covers. I like this. They feel strongly about enforcing things and then supply the resources and guidance needed so that everyone can be successful. I wish more people were like this. Grounded me for leaving a hanger on the dryer. Then extended it for eating while grounded. Then further for sleeping. When told I can't read, crap still pisses me off years later. What were they expecting you to do? Stare holes into space-time continuum? If only I knew. Even my older sister, by year, came out of her room to ask that same question at the time. Lomfeo. In elementary school I used to talk to the lunch lady every day, and then the one day I didn't say hi. She came to my lunch table and told me I was fake, funny, and a few other things, and stopped speaking to me. I still don't understand what her problem was. My great-grandfather's sister was my elementary school lunchroom lady. I got in trouble a few times for calling her Aunt Sarah instead of Mrs. Hadn't thought about that in years. Thank you for triggering that memory. That brought back a memory. We had a schoolmate who always went by Grandma Jane. I'm not sure if it was because her granddaughter was in my class or not, but we all called her Grandma Jane. Anyways, we get a new principal when we are in 3rd or 4th grade. Principal gave us hell and tried to give us lunch detention for calling her Grandma Jane. Keep in mind, we'd been calling this lady Grandma Jane since we were all in kindergarten. Grandma Jane came up to us and the principal and just flat out said something to the effect of, "They call me Grandma Jane. I am Grandma Jane. Grandma Jane is a badass, and last I knew still kicking in what must be her 80s or 90s. Still lives in her own home too." I got in trouble in 6th grade for reading during homeroom. Homeroom was like a random 30-minute period to work on homework, but I always did my homework the night before, so I would just quietly read. For some reason my homeroom teacher hated it. One day she just yelled at me for always reading in her class and told me to do my homework. I told her all of my homework was done. She told me to prove it, so I showed her all of my completed homework. Then she confiscated my book and sent me to the principal's office for being disrespectful. I'm still salty about it. I freaking hate people who equate being proven wrong as disrespectful. What pisses me off the most about it is that it extends beyond the teacher's power trip too. By teaching their students that proving someone wrong is disrespectful, they also teach them that all disagreement is bad and must be stamped out. Then updated facts and also innocuous differences in opinion are seen as rude and shameful. Frick that crap. Had a teacher in kindergarten threaten to expel me because I was sick and didn't show up the day before. She put me on the spot in front of the whole class telling me not to lie and that she'd call the principal. I cried in front of the whole class not knowing what to do. Apparently she wanted to win some attendance award and thought confronting a child was a good idea. Like bruh, I was fucking 5. Still salty on how she got away with it. Attendance awards seem kinda stupid. There's no way to predict when a student will suddenly have a personal or family issue that they need to skip school or just a class for. It seems incredibly stupid, especially for elementary school. I could see this maybe being a thing in high school where kids like to skip class, but no kid in kindergarten has the ability to choose if they are going to class or not on any given day. My aunt was unpleasant or weird with everyone but always particularly cold to me. One day when I was about 14 she took me aside and said she'd held a grudge against me because of my name. She had wanted to call her first daughter that name, but my parents had had a child first and used it. They had no idea she wanted the name and aren't the kind of people who would have done it on purpose. She said she'd tried really hard and had just about forgiven me for it. I just remember being baffled by it and then feeling sorry for her for being that spiteful. To be honest, but it pulled later in comparison with all the other crazy horrible things she did to her own family. Good thing she was only cold to you, but stayed away then. Her aunt was doing her a favor, keeping her niece away from the crazy. My swimming teacher promised me a candy bar if I jumped off the board when I couldn't swim, and when I did they said they forgot, but I saw them eating one in the lounge. I was 5, and I was betrayed. Another thing that swim teacher did instead of teach me to swim was to try and teach the group how to keep their eyes open underwater and see. We all had goggles and had to take them off to do this. Also, I didn't learn to swim there. I ended up learning at a hotel on vacation when my sister taught me like a year later. Man, that's not just BS, that's dangerous. I don't know how dangerous it is. How likely is a 5-year-old to beat up their swimming teacher over a withheld candy bar? On the wedding day of my mom's 3rd wedding, I sat in my room alone crying cause it was hard, but I made sure to remove myself cause I didn't want to upset my mom. When my aunt came to check in on and saw I was crying, she went and told my mom. My mom went out of her way to stop her and Macup to come into my room for being selfish and trying to ruin her happy day, even though I purposefully tried to not look upset in front of her in the first place. To address some of the questions that have come up, yes, she is still married to her 3rd husband, and I'm grateful for it now, because he ended up being great for her, even though he had quite the rocky start with me. My mom also finally went to therapy after I had already grown and left the house and was diagnosed properly and given the help she needs, and we now have a solid relationship, and she still regularly apologizes for the things she did growing up. While still have some childhood baggage, I've built a very happy life for myself, and will definitely use what I learned from my childhood to be a better mom to my kids, if I ever have any. Wonder why it's her 3rd wedding. Thanks y'all. Thankfully she's changed a lot the past couple years after getting a lot of help that she needed, and I've got my own life where I'm happy and don't have to deal with that kind of stuff anymore. When I was young, my mum was best friends with one of the neighbors down the street who also had a boy the same age as me. As a result, I played a lot with said boy and was encouraged to be best friends with him. Whenever my mum wasn't around though, his mum was a complete bitch to me. She would come out to where we were playing together and shout at me for some minor trivial thing. If we were both doing something bad, only minorly bad, we were not bad kids, she would blame it all on me and never reprimand her son at all. This was all when I was like 7-10 years old, and so I couldn't process it at all and had no idea how to react, and it really got to me. I found out years later she was basically jealous because I was doing much better at school than her son and she wanted to take me down a peg. Ultimately, the son and I ended up going to different secondary schools and drifted apart, which meant that fortunately I stopped having to interact with her. Our mums are still good friends, and she has always been pleasant to me as an adult. She even did the flowers at my wedding, but even 30 years later I still keep her at arm's length because of how unfairly she treated me as a child. My parents were weary of other PPL and would never do something as reprimand someone else's child. They'd rather openly shout at us, even when we were not at fault. Later they'd explain that you have no authority over others and should look only at your own. I found it really unfair as a child, but ultimately made me a better person. Yeah, my parents were the same, as were the parents of all my other friends. This is why even as a 7-year-old, her behavior stuck out to me as unusual/unfair. My grade 2 science teacher taught us that there is no food we eat that doesn't come from plants. He gave the example of a cow. It eats grass, so it comes from plants. He offered $5 to anyone who could find anything that people eat that didn't come from plants, and said no one had ever claimed it. We all went home and thought about it. Kids were saying things like marshmallows, ice cream, candy. I put my hand up and answered salt. He was quiet for a moment and admitted that I was correct, and no one had ever thought about that before, not even him, and that millions of people around the world eat salt every day. But he refused to give me the $5. An organism that feeds on decayed organic matter, or on the waste products of other organisms that feed on decayed organic matter, would still fall under the umbrella of, without plants, they wouldn't have anything to eat, rule he had set up. I didn't know about the algae and didn't consider it a food when I was in grade 2, but I had actually thought about mushrooms, and a kid did suggest them. But I knew that even mushrooms wouldn't have food if plants didn't exist. I could have mentioned any mineral, but I mentioned only the one we regularly ate. The lesson was on the food chain and how important plants were to our survival, that we would have nothing at all to eat if they didn't exist. You know, other than salt. Homeboy didn't have $5. Support your teachers. I missed a math test because I was in the hospital. I had documentation and showed the teacher, but he was adamant that I couldn't make up the test and saying it was fine because he dropped the lowest score for everyone anyway. I wanted to take the test because I had studied and wanted my lowest score at the time, a 78, dropped. I asked to make it up after school, still a no. I took it to the guidance counselor and explained my situation, and they made the teacher give me the test. It's important to note that I had printed out my previous assignment grades to show to everyone when pleading my case. Finally took the test and got an A. Looked at my assignment grades and noticed my homework score, which was 100% turned in. Assignments before I went over the teacher's head was now at 50%. Had to go to guidance again with both screenshots in order to get him to fix my grade back. People like that shouldn't be teachers. I hope you saw the last of her after that class. I had science teacher who sucked at teaching. I would raise my hand for help, ask the question, and she would tell me I had dumb question or look it up myself. She would purposefully skip me sometimes, and if I asked for help from classmates in her class, she would send me outside to the hall, so I couldn't learn. I was the only one she did that to. It got to the point I hated her class because I would turn in blank homework because nothing was ever good enough. My parents, teacher, principal, and I gather in principal's office. My parents ask why I'm failing. Teacher said, why don't you ask him? It's turned on me. I say exactly why, and then the lady denies all of it, saying I'm just lazy and I should ask for help and not turn in blank homework because she'll accept anything. My mother said, hold up. You'll accept anything? Teacher said yes. My mother said, so if my child has a question of what's DNA and they put the sky is blue, you just give them full points? Teacher said, well, of course. My mother asked what kind of freaking hiring was the high school doing, because that is not okay. The principal told my mother to calm down and they hired only the best. My mother refused and told the principal, you hire only the best that fit in your pocket to keep your players on the football team, so they pass them without question. Isn't that right, illegal coach? In the state I lived in, principals could not be coaches for their schools. Football team, conflict of interest. The teacher made a comment about, you, insert my last name here, are all the damn same. My mother became livid and walked out because she knew it wasn't my fault. Later that month the teacher was suspended by the Board of Education. Move on to the next year. Her husband was my driving instructor. I get in the car to take my test for my license. I do all safety measures, turn the car on, turn off the radio, and put the car into gear. Move 10 feet, he automatically fails me. Said that's for my wife. Good luck trying to get anywhere in the small town now.